Hey guys, Xell here, and today we're going to be talking about the new game mode that's out for Legends of Runeterra called Expeditions. In this video, we're going to be covering what expeditions even are, and a couple of tips to keep in mind to help you guys get as many wins as possible so that you can earn maximum amount of value for going on these expeditions. So what the hell is an expedition? Basically, it is a limited format for the game. This means that instead of creating a deck with the cards you have collected, you will instead be choosing cards out of a limited pool. Like Magic's drafting or Hearthstone's arena, you're aiming to build the best deck you can out of whatever cards you are given. Expeditions start by giving you 3 sets of randomly generated cards. Each set will have a loose theme. You'll choose a set, add it to your deck, and move on to the next set. You'll also be able to trade out cards to select new ones as well, although the cards you choose to swap are also RNG. This mode will test your game knowledge and deck building skill as you try to make it to 7 wins. You get a couple of chances as you try to make it to 7 wins. For each expedition that you go on, you'll build 2 separate limited decks, and for each deck you get a lifeline of 1 loss. So basically you get a couple of tries to make your money back. So now that you know what an expedition is, let's go over a couple of tips to keep in mind when you're drafting to give you the best possible chance to make it to the 7 wins. Now remember, these rules are not ironclad and you should be taken with a grain of salt. And also remember that this is pretty different from constructed deck building, so a couple of the rules are a little different for each of the formats. Tip number 1, always be checking your curve. This obviously applies to constructed decks too, but it's even more punishing in limited formats. It doesn't matter if you have 30 insane cards if you can't cast it before your opponent overwhelms you in the early game. Make sure your curve is balanced. You need enough early game cards to keep the board in check, but also mid to late game cards to actually win the game. It's better to play some mediocre early game cards than none at all. I'll also add that most 1-drops are not worth playing unless they have significant synergy because they get so quickly outclassed by other cards. There's no worse feeling than needing a good top deck and drawing into a 1-drop. This brings me to tip number 2. Unlike constructed, individual card strength is often more important than their synergy. Constructed decks have much more defined themes and can be built around them. In limited, since we never know what cards we'll get, we have to be a bit more flexible. Cards like Avarosan Hearthguard are amazing because there really isn't a scenario that the card is ever bad to play. No matter what, you're getting a 5/6 for 5 mana. Compare this with a card like Heart of the Fluffed. While maybe you'll be able to get an enormous Poro, sometimes you'll just get a 5 mana 4/4, and that's not good enough. Tip number 3. One of the easiest pitfalls while evaluating cards is thinking about the best case scenario for the card and evaluating a card better than it actually is. Cards like They Who Endure require a set of conditions for the card to be excellent. You might get a 10/10 Overwhelm for 6 mana, or you might end up with a 6 mana 3/3. When drafting, you should be thinking about how good each card is from behind, ahead, and at parity. How good is it if you top deck it on an empty board? Tip number 4, answers are extremely important in limited formats in almost every game. This goes for Legends of Runeterra as well. In fact, it may be even more important in this game because of how powerful champion cards are. It doesn't take long for a card like Zed to end the game if you can't kill him before he starts to snowball. Cards like Mystic Shot, Vengeance, or Detain should be highly valued. Tip number 5. Value, value, value. You may have heard card game players talk about value a lot, and basically they're talking about card advantage. You always want your cards to individually be worth more than a card of your opponent's. This is important in constructed formats too, but doubly important in limited formats. Try to look for cards that can consistently give you card advantage. Cards like Brightsteel Protector or Avalanche can easily net you 2-for-1s. While all the tips that we've talked about so far are pretty much just general tips that are good in pretty much any limited format in any card game, the next few are going to be about Legends of Runeterra in particular. Don't rely on trades to save your draft. While trades offer an opportunity to take worse cards out of your deck, it's completely out of your control. You don't get to decide what cards are being traded and what they're being traded for. This means while you're drafting, you should be very careful not to pick an actively bad card to get at a card that you think is really good. Don't rely on the names of the draft piles to dictate if they're good for your deck. Actually take the time to see if the cards are even good for your deck. In the short time I drafted, there were a couple of times that despite the name of the pile, I got cards that made 0 sense for the cards I had drafted previously. Be sure to do your homework. For my last tip, remember that unlike in the constructed mode of the game, you can have more than 2 factions in your deck. This actually opens up the table for many more possible synergies and unique interactions between your cards, so make sure to keep an eye out. Anyways, I think these are a couple tips that I think will help you draft in the new game mode. A couple of just like personal takes about the game mode itself. My initial assumption is that Freljord and Demacia are probably the best factions, considering their unit quality are so high in comparison to some of the other factions, especially like Ionia, who has particularly weak units for their mana costs. And rely more on synergies to make them useful. This also goes for Shadow Wilds. I just feel like Freljord and Demacia just have such individually powerful cards. Like Freljord in particular seems just so good in comparison to most of the other factions. Like the fact that you can draft a card like She Who Wins the Game, or just even solid cards like Alpha Wildclaw, just make Freljord such a powerhouse in the draft format. Of course, take this with a grain of salt, because when I playtested it, I didn't really get to play against human opponents that often. So it's kind of hard to tell if the stuff I was doing was even like the correct thing. But those are just kind of like my initial hot take. The other thing that I hope happens in the future is that I hope Riot actually takes a look at the trade system for drafting. I feel like the trade system has a lot of potential in terms of like fine-tuning the deck that you draft. The only thing that kind of sucks though is that because you have zero control over which cards get selected to be traded and what cards you're going to be trading them for, it just means that like my drafting was going to be far more risk adverse than I think it would have been if trades were more controlled. Like if I could choose which card to take away for a random card, I think that would be more interesting as far as a decision goes. I found that like for the most part, I really didn't ever want to trade cards, but yeah, I don't know. That's just something that I think would probably make the game mode even better. Anyways, thanks for watching the video, and big shout outs to Riot for allowing me to, test out the game mode a couple days before the preview patch. I haven't really been all that active on YouTube recently, but I'm looking to change that around. So if you guys like the video, do the normal things, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video. I'll also probably be streaming Legends of Runeterra, so go check out my stream at twitch.tv/Xell. Anyways, hope to see you guys later. Have a good day. Peace.